Vincent van Gogh was described as a misunderstood genius. His struggles with his mental health were well documented in his letters to his brother, and right as his art career started to gain traction, he decided to end it all. This made him the poster child of the starving artist, a person who would exchange his well-being for the sake of his art. But some things just don't add up. Hi, hello everyone, and welcome back. Today we are going to be talking about the story of Vincent van Gogh. If you don't know who Vincent van Gogh is, he was a Dutch post-impressionist painter whose artistic journey is one of the most well-documented of all of the classic artists. This is because there are over 900 letters that were exchanged between Vincent and his family and friends, especially between Vincent and his younger brother Theo. They were both very close, and Theo kept over 600 letters that Vincent had sent him. And after they both passed, Theo's family worked to get them translated and put out to the public. So because of this, we have a very intimate and personal knowledge of Vincent's life. Now, because there is over 900 of them, I did not read all of the letters in my research for this video. But I have linked a website that has all of them translated and in order, if you would like to read them for yourself. And maybe one day I will read all of them and do a follow-up video, but that day is not today. But through all of these letters, we have a very direct insight into his life, which is really cool. And there's a lot to get through today, but before we get started, I do want to put out a disclaimer that we are going to be going over topics of mental health and self-harm. So if any of that is a sensitive topic for you, then I would not recommend you watch this video. So with that, let's get into the life of Vincent van Gogh. Vincent Wilhelm van Gogh was born on March 30th, 1853 in the Netherlands. His father was a minister of the Dutch Reformed Church, and his mother came from a well-off family. He was the oldest of 6, with 2 brothers and 3 sisters. His father's work as a minister didn't pay a ton of money, but the church gave the family a house, a gardener, a maid, 2 cooks, a carriage, and a horse, so they were doing pretty well for themselves compared to other people. Vincent was described as a serious and thoughtful child, but it's said that he showed signs of mental instability from a young age. Up until 1860, he was taught at home by his mother and a governess, and they sent him to a village school in 1864, where he was then placed in a boarding school a few years after that. During his time at the boarding school, he felt abandoned and wanted to come home, but instead, in 1866, he was sent to a middle school that was also away from home, and after 2 years in this school, Vincent left to go home and never ended up finishing school. A lot of Vincent's family was involved in the art world. Many of his uncles were art dealers, and one of them managed to get Vincent a job with the Goupil et Compagnie art dealers in 1869. He was transferred to the London branch and was fairly happy during this time. That was until he got rejected by his landlady's daughter. After this incident, he became reclusive, and his father arranged for him to transfer to Paris, but after another year, he was dismissed from his job with the art dealers. He returned to England in April of 1876 and worked as a substitute teacher in a small boarding school. He would go from there to become a Methodist minister's assistant before going home for 6 months, where he would work in a bookstore. After he was rejected by his landlady's daughter back in London, he had developed an interest in religion which stayed with him until 1877, when his family suggested he go stay with his uncle, who was a respected theologian. From there, he attempted to take the entrance exam for the University of Amsterdam Theology, but didn't pass. He tried another course at a Protestant missionary school, but failed that too, before taking up a post as a missionary in Belgium in 1879. In March of 1880, he moved back in with his parents, but they said he was very hard to live with, and his dad got him committed to an asylum nearby. When he returned from the hospital in August, he started to pick up drawing. He studied under the artist William Rolfus, who encouraged him to study at a fancy art academy that I'm not going to try to pronounce. In 1881, he had an extended stay at his parents' place, where his recently widowed cousin Cornelia Stryker came for a visit with her son. They would go for long walks through the property, and Vincent soon fell in love with his cousin. Also, did I mention that Vincent's parents were also cousins? I get that it was normal back then, but it does not make it any less weird. Anyways, Vincent fell in love with his cousin and declared his love to her, to which she responded, "No, nay, never." She said no in 3 different ways, and Vincent didn't take that super well. So after she left to go back home to Amsterdam, he went to visit her, and when she refused to see him, he put his hand into the fire of a lantern, saying, "Let me see her as long as I can hold my hand in the flame." So obviously he is a very stable person. He said later that he didn't remember the incident, and Cornelia's parents really had her back throughout this whole thing, and said that his persistence was disgusting, and her rejection should be heeded. This seemed to get Vincent's attention, and there are no more mentions of him bothering Cornelia or her family again. After that whole ordeal, another one of Van Gogh's cousins, who was also an artist, took him on as a student and introduced him to watercolor and oil paints, and eventually lent him money for a studio. But within a month, they had a falling out and didn't communicate after that. I'm just surprised he didn't fall in love with this cousin too. During 1882 and 1883, Vincent lived with an adult worker and her daughter before his parents found out and pressed him to leave, to which he would move back in with his parents in December and started to focus on drawing and painting outside more. In 1884, a neighbor's daughter named Margot Begeman started to join him while he painted, and they fell in love, but neither family approved of the relationship. Margot was so upset by this that she tried to overdose, but survived because Vincent was able to get her to the hospital in time. Unfortunately, I don't know what happened to them after that, but on March 26, 1855, Vincent's father died of a heart attack, and in August of the same year, Vincent's work was publicly displayed for the first time. He moved to Antwerp and rented a room above a paint dealer's shop where he would start focusing on color theory and started to use more colors in his work. Here was where he created his painting, The Potato Eaters, and he lived on a diet of coffee, bread, and tobacco, preferring to spend the money his brother would send him on art supplies. This is really where the starving artist aspect of his whole story really kicks in, where he would just completely neglect his basic needs for art instead. But Van Gogh would get kicked out of the Academy of Fine Arts in 1886 and moved to Paris to live with his brother Theo, where he started to adopt a brighter color palette and collected Japanese woodblock prints. In 1987, he moved to Agnières, where he would stay for 2 years and create over 200 paintings. He also arranged an exhibition here that was described to be ahead of anything in Paris at the time. He became sick and settled down in Arles, which I apologize if I butchered. Usually I'm pretty good at pronouncing things in French, but that word, I can't. Arles. He settled down in Arles in 1888, where he leased 4 rooms in what is known as the Yellow House, and his work from this time included a lot more yellow, and here was where some of his more iconic works were produced, including A Vase with 12 Sunflowers and Bedroom in Arles. Vincent invited an artist friend of his, Paul Gauguin, to visit, and he arrived on October 23rd, but in December, their friendship began to deteriorate rapidly. Gauguin was apparently very arrogant and domineering, and this upset Vincent, who only wanted to be treated as an equal. The situation became very tense and rapidly deteriorated, like I said earlier, and the exact series of events aren't known, but on December 23rd, Vincent would either fully or partially cut off his own left ear, bandage himself up, before wrapping the ear in paper and giving the package to a 17-year-old cleaner who worked in a brothel that Vincent and Paul would frequent. He was found unconscious the next morning by police, who brought him to the hospital and ordered him to stay under the hospital's care. And Vincent said he had no memory of this incident, just like the one with the fire, and suspected he suffered from an acute mental breakdown. Gauguin would leave Arles after telling Theo what had happened and that Vincent was in the hospital, and never saw Van Gogh again. 15 years later, though, Gauguin would say that Vincent attacked him with the razor before harming himself, but this isn't corroborated anywhere else. Van Gogh returned to the Yellow House on January 7th of 1889 and spent the following month between his home and the hospital. 4 months after the incident, he attempted to off himself by eating oil paints and turpentine, but his doctor was able to save him, thankfully. He left Arles and voluntarily entered an asylum in St. Remy, and then entered another asylum in May. At this asylum, he had 2 rooms, one of which was a studio. The garden and the clinic would become his inspiration, and his most famous painting, The Starry Night, was created here. He would also start doing recreations of other artists' work, including Millet's The Sower. There was a period of time where Vincent didn't write, but he told Theo that he was able to paint some small canvases from memory. In 1890, Vincent's work started to get some attention. Albert Aurier praised his work, calling him a genius, and he was invited to participate in the Les Vents annual exhibition. From March 20th to April 27th, Van Gogh was included in the 6th exhibition of the Society of Independent Artists, where his work was praised by Claude Monet, who thought it was the best in show. In May, he left the clinic to move to the northwestern outskirts of Paris to be closer to his brother and doctor. And in July, he wrote to his brother that he felt the countryside was healthy and invigorating for him, and he enjoyed painting the wheat fields nearby. On July 27, 1890, Vincent van Gogh supposedly shot himself in the stomach with a revolver and died 2 days later due to infection. Now, you'll notice I said supposedly, and that's because I don't think he did it himself. It's no secret that Vincent struggled with his mental health. I mean, it's pretty obvious that he was not a stable individual, but in the time leading up to his death, he seemed to be doing better. His career was starting to pick up. He voluntarily got help and said moving to the countryside was doing him a lot of good. To me, it doesn't seem like he wanted to hurt himself at the time. So before we get into too much detail, here is what I think happened. I think Vincent was out in the wheat fields, either he was painting or he was on a walk. He got shot by someone else and made his way back into town where he got treated, and his brother came to be with him before he died 2 days later. I think that he didn't do it himself, but he wasn't upset that it happened. Like, he wasn't mad and wanted to find the person that did it. So he just told everybody that he did it himself so they wouldn't worry over trying to find out who did it. He just didn't want to cause them any more trouble. Now, there is no way to prove or disprove anyone's theory. Because the case is so old, even if we do exhume the body, there's no way to figure out like any ballistic information or anything, so there's absolutely no way anybody can definitively know what happened to him. But there are a lot of inconsistencies that come with the suicide theory. One is that there wasn't any mention of a powder burn on Vincent's hands from firing the gun. Granted, that detail could have just been brushed over because back then it was obviously suicide, so that wouldn't have been like a detail somebody would have thought to mention or anything. But there was no powder burn, and there's the fact that the shot was in the stomach. Shots to the stomach aren't really a common form of committing suicide, so usually if you want to do that, you want it to be fast, right? And dying from infection 2 days after getting shot is not very fast. Now, he could have been having an episode like the ones he had before where he hurt himself, but those incidents followed a sort of pattern. There was some amount of emotional distress that Vincent was under before he did it. He got rejected by his cousin, then put his hand in the lantern flame. Him and Gauguin were fighting, and then he cut his ear. But with this, there isn't a sign of an emotionally distressing situation before he got hurt. Again, he said he was feeling better living in the country, and if there was something going on, you'd think he would have told his brother. I mean, he told his brother just about everything else, so why not that? If he was having an episode, a shot to the stomach would make sense, but to me it doesn't seem like he was. Now, under the assumption that he didn't harm himself, who did? There was apparently rumors after his death that a group of teenagers shot Vincent on accident, and there was, again supposedly, a gang of teens that would go around pretending to be Wild West pioneers and play with revolvers. This same group would also bully Vincent. So if all of this is true, then one theory could be that this group shot Vincent probably on accident, and he just didn't tell anyone. Unfortunately, again, there's no way to ever know what actually happened to him, and it's not like we can exhume him and perform an autopsy, because all that's left is bones. So all we can do is theorize about what happened. But in my opinion, the evidence leans more towards somebody else hurting him than him hurting himself. Even though he does have a history of that, It doesn't make a lot of sense. At least to me. Again, all of the opinions in this video are mine. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. This video is longer than my usual ones, and I really tried to condense down the information as much as I could without leaving out important details. But there was just so much information about him because of all the letters, which is really cool, but it was hard to figure out what to keep in and what to leave out. And I do feel like this whole thing was kind of rushed, but I don't want it to be too long, you know? But what do you guys think? What actually happened to Vincent van Gogh? I would love to discuss this with you guys, and please share any important details that I may have missed because I want to have like the full story and all that. And also feel free to look into it for yourself. I have all of the websites and articles I read through to get information for this, so feel free to read through those if you want. They're there for you if you want them. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing so you don't miss out on my next video, and I will see you next week. Bye bye!